I would like to introduce our webinar guest for today. So Barry Richards at Transmission, I'm delighted that you have joined the Lead Forensics webinar. We've been keen to have you on for some time for a number of different reasons. But before I go into that, I just wanted to intro you. So you are VP of Global Strategy at Transmission. And I guess strategy has been pretty much your whole career, but very specifically in the B2B marketing space. So you're a real expert there and seasoned strategist, but with a real skill around ABM. And that was the reason that we wanted you to come on today. Transmission are a great agency, award-winning, really results focused, but you work with a range of clients across a number of different sectors. And one of those being manufacturing, which you have won numerous awards for. We have a lot of manufacturing clients in Lead Forensics, so we were really keen to pick your brains about the ABM strategies that you've run in the manufacturing space and invite you on to talk about that in more detail with us. So welcome, Barry.
Thank you, Kirsty. It's very kind of you to invite me on. Looking forward to chatting.
Yeah, no, I mean, ABM, right? We all know as marketers, we need to use ABM, but it's not necessarily something that businesses, marketing directors, sales marketing directors in the manufacturing space are as advanced with as potentially some of the other verticals that we might work with. So if you think about the tech space, everybody is going to be running or having some sort of ABM campaign. But it's really important in manufacturing, and you're seeing great success. So today we're going to talk about why ABM is right for manufacturing, and then most excitingly for our listeners and our watchers, we are going to talk about what you have learned from running those ABM campaigns. So Barry, I guess over to you in terms of the first question that would be really useful to get the answer to. Why is ABM really important for business growth in manufacturing?
No, I think it's a great place to start. And before I dive into what you can see on the slide, I started my life on the client side in marketing, in enterprise marketing at Microsoft a while ago, longer than I care to tell you exactly how long. And it was interesting back then. I think we had more of a demand gen style of marketing and what we were doing. This was back in the days when it might have been called key account marketing.
Yeah.
And back then, although I think it was useful to introduce marketing into large accounts, we typically faced two problems. Number one was because we were still doing it in a marketing orientated way and not working as closely with account teams. Quite often the account teams will say, well, you can't really send that in because that's contrary or that's contradicting or it's different to the conversation that I'm actually having. Right?
Yeah.
Most of us have a big portfolio of things to talk about, and they didn't always line up. Also, sometimes if things did go ahead and there was a mismatch, the account teams would get pushback from their clients who'd seen it, basically saying, does the left hand know what the right hand's doing?
Sure.
So even before we go into some of the things we're going to talk about, I think that there was a lot of territory there for a different approach into these large accounts.
Yeah.
And the business, if you look at it, the business has already decided that these accounts deserve a different approach. They've had dedicated account teams for as long as we can remember. So although for some of us account-based marketing is newish or relatively new, this idea of focusing on your best customers is not really a new idea at all. But look, I think there's three things that we can chat through, Kirsty, that also drive the need for a different approach. And this is, as we know, buying organizations, decision-making units, whatever you want to call them, have grown in complexity massively. People have realized, I think, that especially for their big strategic accounts, it's about long time or lifetime customer value.
Yeah.
And therefore they understand about investing and engaging those accounts, and it's not always a sales message, right? And I think more and more, you know, we've seen research come out over the years that shows actually what a small number of our prospective clients are actually in market at any one time. And again, if we think about engaging and lifetime value, we can't always just play to that 5%, right? You know, we have to play to the 95% who want to.
Yeah. And going back on a couple of those points, it almost sounds like what you're saying is, well, yeah, we might think of manufacturing businesses as not being ahead of the curve in ABM, but actually they've been doing it, but calling it something else. There's been key account marketing, but the bit that makes it ABM and really turns it around to deliver that joined up success is bringing sales and marketing together in the messaging, so that, you know, the key account element isn't owned by one function or another. It's a joined up approach, and that's what makes it true ABM.
Yeah, look, 100%. I think ABM's really shone a spotlight on how marketing works with other organizations, especially sales. Perhaps something that had been conveniently left for a while for some, not for all organizations, but maybe for some.
Yeah, no, definitely. And, you know, we talk about the reasons why ABM is so important. And I think one of the things that we've chatted about previously is, you know, buying units being really complex, but actually in manufacturing, potentially they're even more complex, because if you're selling something where it's going to impact a number of different decision makers at all levels, some of them you might be able to reach digitally, some may not, some will be in different sites. You know, you might have the CEO, the president involved, but you might have influence from, you know, the guys who are actually, you know, working, you know, at the coalface delivering. You really, really need to think about how you're going to approach marketing to those businesses. So talk to us a bit more about what you're seeing and the insight that you've got around that.
Yeah, look, I think complexity is a great way to describe this. You know, as we know in B2B, I think organizations in the last 20, 30 years have got a lot more sophisticated. There's been a massive growth of these matrix style organizations. And so you now have a range of people that you need to involve and are part of the process of making a decision during this buying cycle. And as companies specialize, you get more specialist roles coming in. And I think sensibly, manufacturers need to recognize that and play to it, right? So look, whether or not you agree it's gone from 5 to 11, there are a whole range of pieces of research out there that will show slightly different numbers. I think the fact that number has grown so significantly adds a big challenge to the account teams, to the sales teams, and it's definitely an area where marketing can really help, and we'll talk about that a bit later. But I think, look, also if you look at the average buying cycles, again, these numbers might not match. Some of the people who are watching today might not match exactly, but you'll get the principle. They can be very long and extended. So you need a sophisticated marketing approach that understands that conversation is going to go on for a while, that responds to the different parts of that conversation as it matures towards a sale. But also, and I think this is a really important point for people starting out on their ABM journeys, you have to be really cognizant of when you're going to see the revenue. Because if you're going to tie your investment to a revenue figure, you have to understand that you might not see that revenue in the financial year that you're operating your program in.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think, you know, manufacturing, you know, in particular, there's probably, you've got two sides of the scale where you've got, you know, very significant purchases that are going to take a long time, or you might even have initial traction you get with a customer where they might go, right, okay, we're going to take some solution from you, some product from you, but it's not the value that you want. It's not because you've identified them as a big business, but that doesn't happen overnight. It builds over time. So yeah, I think managing expectations around revenue is really, really important, because you don't run ABM as a campaign and look at it at the end and go, did that work or did it not? It has to be constant.
I was just gonna I think another complexity, with the growth of multinational organizations, is what we see is sometimes you can have two very different approaches. You can see an organization that might be quite centralized or globalized, and you're approaching a single set of procurement, policy, whoever it is, and they're going to buy what you have to offer, and that they're going to buy that on behalf of the global organization. But much more what we see actually is a two-tier selling process, which again adds to the complexity. Organizations that are decentralized, the central function will make sure that you get onto a preferred suppliers list through your bidding process, make sure you tick the boxes, adhere to the policies, have the right attributes that they're looking for in a supplier. But you then have to then go, that only gives you a license to sell. You then have to go and sell yourself to the regions or the factories or the location, because they have the autonomy to buy what they want. So again, complexity comes, I think, in many forms today.
Yeah, so really, really spending the time mapping out how that business buys and the decision-making unit and where they are is so important, because, again, a major point of failure could be, well, we've just focused on one side of that buying unit and neglected all of the others. And actually, these are the ones who make the final decision. So yeah, I hadn't realized that. I tend to always think about a DMU being, or decision-making unit being, together and aligned, but it could be complete. I suppose it goes down to like having procurement and then the actual people who physically need the solution.
It's interesting, because with some of our clients, we're effectively operating a two-tier ABM program. The first tier is to get into these people, and you have that initial bid, contract, service agreement or sales agreement that then allows you to operate inside the organization. We then work with those people, those decision makers, to promote that decision, to promote them as key people, and offer a bit of self-promotion within inside the organization for making a great arrangement and a great deal, in order to create a platform for the salespeople to then go off and do their hunting through the organization.
Right. So with that first tier, they're becoming your champions, basically.
100%.
Within the organization. So you've identified those, and then they support your salespeople having the conversations with the individuals who are actually going to sign on the dotted line. And that brings me to my next point, because I think, with ABM, well, we know, like, every organization will have, we used to call it back when I first used to call it your dream accounts, like your dream accounts that you want to work with, or you've talked about key accounts. Every organization, every leader within an organization will know who those accounts are. But ABM's not that simple, because you can't go, right, well, we want those accounts, and what we're going to do is we're just going to keep talking to them and they'll buy from us and that'll all work out. Because where there are so few of them, the likelihood is that the majority will not be in the buying cycle right now. So if you want to embark on an ABM program, you're very clear about the fact that it has to be measured by how you're able to engage with those organizations, rather than, okay, we're going to get them, we're going to talk to them, work with them for a bit, and then they're going to buy. It's like, if we can get engagement as a starting point, that will support us for when they do come into the buying cycle.
Yeah, look, 100%. And look, if you've got people in place that you know, you're continuing a journey of deepening that engagement. But quite often, when we're starting with clients, one of the big things is they need to find new people, and principally there's two things that drive that. One is we meet a lot of people who are in quite a transactional arrangement with their target accounts. What they recognize is they want a more strategic relationship, and they recognize that they're perhaps not connected with senior enough roles to have a more strategic relationship and conversation. So, sometimes one of the first things we have to do is go and find those people, actually uncover them and work out who they are in the organization. So that transactional to strategic step is quite a frequent one that we see in manufacturing. And I think the other element of that is the idea of just different decision makers in different business units and departments. So the classic, let's expand. Right.
Yeah.
We're in there. We know what we're doing. We're in this business unit here. There's another 5 or 6 business units or departments. We want to go and do the same, but obviously we don't know who they are. So I think at the beginning of your engagement story, there's always this bit, right? Who are the right people for us to achieve our aims with? And then I think no prizes for guessing. It's about, if you talk about engagement and long-term and lifetime value, it's about relationships, which is no surprise to anyone in an account team who's been doing this. Yeah.
So thinking about that then, and the decision to go wider and to think, right, okay, well, if person A and person B leave tomorrow, like, we don't actually have a relationship, so we need to start to really think about all the people that we could influence with the organization, all the people that we could potentially provide value to. Isn't that one of the first places where marketing can really start to support sales? Because they can start to build out that research, that data, that insight, and say, right, these are the people that you need to speak to, or certainly be sense checking that with sales, so that it's not all on sales backs to try and, because they're obviously managing those accounts day to day to get value from them. It's a great opportunity for marketing to step in and get that research done.
Yeah, look, 100%. And I think when you're talking about that research there, again, I think ABM has driven a much bigger focus on creating that 360-degree picture of your customer or your client or your target organization, of really working out what different signals that your organization has that you can bring together to say, who do we think is that 5% in market? Who do we think is ready, and who isn't? And I think that lets you do it lets you do a number of things. Obviously, if you are trying to elicit a response and maybe a conversation that leads to something more, interesting and immediate, you're going to want to focus on those 5% that you think are in market. So, people more and more are using third-party intent data. They're using signals from their websites where they can track these organizations interacting with different product or solution areas. They're using signals from their marketing automation platforms where they're collecting feedback on how people are engaging with campaigns. And a number of clients we've worked with have developed their own kind of propensity to buy models. If they bought this before, typically we see customers will then buy this. So I think more and more clients, and this is manufacturing, this is across the board, are seeing the value of that research piece that you call out at the beginning, typically a piece of segmentation work using some sort of customer data platform to bring it all together. And then you can make a number of decisions, right? You can then really say, based on the segment, whether you think they're in or out of market, what should we do? For those out of market, common things that we do today: thought leadership style activities, maybe even brand style activities where you have perhaps broader, more engaging kind of human messages at a brand level that are things that you can work with outside of that response motion, where you're going in very directly to try and start a conversation, typically around portfolio A, product B, whatever it is.
Yeah. So on that, identifying the 5%, I guess what we're saying is, right, we know, let's say we pick 100 accounts, or that, even it depends on the size of the organization and what they do, but we pick the accounts that we want to go after. Obviously, sales are going to have a great deal of insight on who that 5% might be. But then what you're saying, which I think is really important, is we can widen that insight by using those segmentation tools, the marketing insight that perhaps sales wouldn't previously have access to, like the intent data, the signals on the website, and just really verify that that genuinely is the 5%. Because equally, if you've got someone who is like, one of your sales leaders says, look, these guys are really, really hot, we're about to convert them. Maybe you're already there with those. It's like the second layer of the 5% who are coming into the buying cycle that you want to grab before they start to get deeper with some of your competition. So using those outside signals are really important. I mean, have you got any examples of what maybe some of your clients have used to get some of that insight?
Yeah, definitely. So look, I think what's been interesting in B2B in the last kind of 5 to 10 years, more so in the last 5 to 7 years, is the adoption of B2B customer data platforms. Something that B2C has been working B2C for quite a while, and these are really, the beauty of these is they're kind of plug and play platforms. They come with lots of APIs pre-prepared, so they can plug easily into different kinds of marketing automation systems, different kinds of ABM web tracking systems and platforms, into sales, whatever
CRM,
it is,
all of that kind of stuff.
exactly, CRM, and the ability to bring that data in around that your target list of organizations, and then to be able to slice and dice and attribute things and create segments. So, the likes of Sixth Sense, Lead Space, Adobe, D&B RevUp, there's a whole suite there now. By and large, they all do a very similar thing, that kind of bringing stuff together. They've all got slightly different approaches and different stacks that go with it. But I think that's been a big game changer. It's made, I think we've always talked about the dream of the 360-degree version of the customer. The barrier has always been, I think, an IT one, getting data out of disparate systems and into somewhere that you can do something with it. And I think these platforms have given marketers a much easier choice or a much easier way of achieving that.
Yeah. And is that something that you would always make a recommendation of investing in, or is it like a phase 2 thing? Obviously, it sounds great if you have all those APIs pre-built to just be able to, plug in your CRM data, plug in your like website visitor data, your individuals who are engaging with your like your content and things like that. But if you don't have that, where do you start?
Well, look, I'm gonna answer the first bit of your question, which is, do we think you should start there?
Yeah.
Personally,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
Because through the years, whenever we've had a success or a failure in an account-based marketing program, obviously we want to get under the skin of it. And anecdotally, 9 times out of 10, it's because the wrong account was chosen.
Right.
And for me, the more rigor you have at the beginning and the more signals you have around those accounts and the more, care and attention you put into that initial segmentation, I personally think that's one of the, that increases your percentage of success more than many other things that you do through the cycles. So to your first question, yes, I think these kind of platforms, this kind of segmentation is perhaps a priority. But if
Mm-hmm.
you can't do it, I mean, there are ways and means of doing these things that you know.
Yeah.
I'm sure we remember the days when all you had was a spreadsheet, right?
Yes.
There
And
are
Power
ways of it.
BI or something like that, yeah, you
Yeah,
could potentially use. But I
exactly.
mean, is it something though that you need a significant investment to start with, like having a CDP, or actually could you do something quite meaningful with just a reasonable investment?
I, I I guess it's down to everyone's definition of reasonable. I think when we look at the licensing agreements of some of these platforms, I think, yes, actually, if you're spreading it over a significant number of accounts, which most of our clients are responsible for, then I think
Yes.
it does feel like these are relatively reasonable prices. But there's always the opportunity that you can look to see where you know, there are people out there that put these stacks together. It's something that we do. So there's always the opportunity that you might not have to buy into all of this technology yourself. You may be able to work with someone that can
Sure.
basically run it
Yeah.
on your behalf. You know,
Yeah. And leverage it. But it does, I think it if you most businesses are going to have a reasonable number of accounts. So even if your plan is not to run an ABM program on every single account that you put into the platform, the insight that you will get from there, like, retention data, like trends, and like you talked about earlier, signals that show that someone is just about to come into a buying cycle when they bought something else, like the rich data that you'll get
yeah,
aside from ABM probably would pay
yeah.
for the cost of the platform. Okay, really interesting. So, I mean, great place to recommend our audience to start is like get your data into a place where you can interrogate it, because ABM programs, if you're going to do it well, it's not going to be a tiny budget. So make sure you spend it on the right businesses.
And to your point, Kirsty, you might not have the people and the budget to do a marketing program across all the accounts, but it's very easy to leverage the intelligence and give that to the teams that
Yes.
are focused on the accounts that you
Yes.
might not be reaching, right?
Completely. And again, it comes back to another way that sales and marketing can work more closely together, but marketing can serve sales,
Yeah.
because marketing can own getting that insight pulled together and then say, right, okay, we're going to use this for the ABM part of the program, but what you just said is, and we can also serve that other data that we're getting into sales, so they're focusing their attentions on the right place across the board. Okay, so
100.
I want to chat now about, obviously you have run a number of very successful ABM programs at Transmission, award winning. I know you won an award for the ABM campaign that you ran for Henkel, and I think this is always what our prospects and clients are interested in. It's like, well, what does good look like?
Yeah.
And how can you help us to not make the mistakes that have been made in the past?
Yeah.
So we're gonna chat about that and get some of your learnings about, the difference between piloting and scaling, and which is the best way to go, how to do effective planning, how to create your messaging and content, how to resource an ABM campaign effectively, and how to measure success. So quite a bit to cover. So let's get into it. I think this point I know is one that's really close to your heart at Transmission, and also with
Yeah.
the campaigns that you've run, because as marketers, we all want to do ABM that's excellent. And, quite often, that means, right, we are identifying these individual accounts as one-to-one campaigns, and every single message is going to be highly tailored to that account and everything that we know about them, which obviously is ABM utopia. But I know, again, from our previous conversations, that you've got some learnings about how you manage potentially testing that approach, but also at the same time doing some other things to scale your ABM program. So the entire measurement of success isn't based on one or two accounts. So can you give us a bit more insight into
Yeah.
that?
So look, when we were chatting, typically we'll talk about piloting, what you do with pilots, what you get out of it. And then typically for most organizations, if they've done a pilot, the second stage is, well, that's worked there. We want it to work over a much wider set of accounts. So now we need to scale what we've learned, right? So based on our chat, Kirsty, I thought, right, let's put these together because I think they're intrinsically linked. I think because you've got that 1-2, obviously what you do in the pilot can be really important to help you understand how to scale. So a lot of our clients, and I think across the board, not just us, a lot of people saw the dream as marketers of ABM, as you said, of getting into the deep insights, rich customization, really doing that very bespoke marketing, which kind of got us up in the morning. And so working hand in hand with an account team. And so that would be their pilot because they want to do the most complex. And we saw a lot of people do that, but then being asked then to scale that across a much larger number of accounts. And as most people have either learned or will see quite soon, you can't just keep doing one-to-one programs. They are too intensive for most people by the very nature of what they're asking. However, there are some advantages to piloting one-to-one. You don't really need your tech in place because you've just got one account. You can use lots of manual workarounds in how you build things, build journeys, even doing your data analysis that we were talking about in segmentation. So you know it's a nice shortcut there if you don't have your tech in place.
As long as you pick the right account.
As long as you pick the right account, absolutely. But if you start with something, and I've put an example here, I've just one to few, right? So let's say rather than starting with one account, you start with 50 accounts or even 20 accounts. Immediately, you have to start thinking of common denominators. And immediately, if you want to customize per account, you have to think about how to do it in a clever way that allows you to reuse 60, 70, 80% of what you're doing for everyone, and then customize a little bit for maximum effect. But operationally, if you've got 20 accounts, you know, you don't want to be doing 20 versions of one-to-one. So piloting this way, immediately you have to think about how you use tech. You have to think about how you need to be clever about ramping up. How do you do research and insights at scale on multiple accounts? How do you turn that into a bit of customized messaging for each of those accounts, right, without rewriting everything from top to bottom? How do you create an experience online, you know, where perhaps say the landing page is bespoke to that account to match some sort of initial driving that you've done? And again, you don't necessarily want to be creating 20 to 50 individual landing pages. So I think although it's not what a lot of people, I think genuinely, personally, it's not what a lot of people want to do because the dream of ABM is one-to-one. You know, I still think a lot of people see that. I do think if you start at this one-to-few end where you're already having to scale in your pilot, you are tackling a lot of the things that stop great one-to-one programs becoming a blueprint for a broader approach. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yes, it does. I think you know, the last thing that we want as a marketer is to get an ABM program underway, but do it at this really intense level, not, as we know, long sales cycles, all of that, not achieve the success that we want, and then it gets cut short. So, you know, almost like potentially identify one account that you might want to do one-to-one with, but then create an at-scale approach to run alongside that to get some quick wins and some initial traction, because it's as much about how you PR that back to the business as anything to say, well, like we're making, you know, because it's always going to be an investment, you know, whether that's in, you know, the time and the energy, the two teams working together, to the media, to whatever you do to push the campaign out. So if you have them working in tandem, you're almost covering yourself from a future success perspective, because you're going to, if you go one to few, the likelihood is you'll be able to uncover some success or some potential engagement that you know will lead to success. Whereas if you're just banking on one account getting that, you know, there's a risk there, isn't there?
No, look, 100%. I think early on, you have to win.
Yes.
I mean, I know I'm stating the obvious, but you have to win in order for your ABM program to survive and for you to continue the investment and the development. There's very little room to maneuver, and we've seen this with clients if the pilot is deemed to have failed.
Yes.
And to your point, there's a simple principle about putting all your eggs in one basket here, right? The dual option that you're suggesting, or even just doing the scaling option, naturally your eggs aren't all in that one basket. And yeah, that's one way to mitigate survival, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And with the one to few, again, going back to technology, are there things that you really need to have in place to be able to run this at scale? Or, you know, could a business work with, you know, an agency like Transmission to give them access to those things that would enable them to test and then decide to invest in them themselves?
Yeah, look, genuinely, I think yes. I think interestingly, because you know, again, when a lot of people come to us with one to few, they tend to think of very small numbers of accounts, somewhere between 1 and 10, right? And they might not necessarily have any of the MarTech set up that we've kind of been chatting about. And very quickly, what they establish is, well, we need to do the same thing to all organizations, right? Because the budget I've got, the time I've got, I can't start doing account specific things here. I'm not able to bring the account teams in. So at that point, we kind of say, well, if you're doing something that suits all accounts, and typically that might be an industry,
yes,
then you may as well bring in more accounts into that. You might as well leverage that investment you've done. You've got nothing to lose.
That makes sense. Yeah.
However, if you do have that technology there, you know, if you have something like your technology that allows you to personalize a landing experience, for example, and arguably that's one of the first places we always start, right? Because the one thing that can sit amazingly on its own and hold a lot of value without having to have the rest of the journey personalized is the landing page, because the account teams, for a start, can use that as a central location publicly to use with the account, irrespective of what marketing do. So that tends to be a massive tick in the box from the account teams straight off. But if we can bring in technology, say like yours, you know, then suddenly you can add an element of customization into 10, 20, 50 accounts quite easily. You can maybe write a small dedicated value proposition for that account based on some, you know, a few insights that you've found. So I think it gives you a big jump. It definitely gives you a big jump.
Yeah, that makes sense. A good springboard. And I think it's a really good point you make about, okay, well, if we've identified 20 accounts and they all have this characteristic, why not include all of the accounts that have those characteristics, whether that be a certain behavior that they've had, or they sit in a certain vertical or a certain region. It's like, you know, let's give ourselves the best chance of success on that first pilot. That's how we get ABM into our organization and get into the swing of things, and then we can start to go deeper. But it's almost like go wider, not wide, but go wider, get some initial success, and then you can hone it in. Okay, good.
100%.
So I'm going to kind of chat through this one, because I know that a lot of our clients will be like, and listeners will just be like, okay, well, where do we start? Obviously, I think to recap on what you said, Barry, earlier, the criterion selection and the insight and analysis piece, actually, both of those can work really well together if you've got a CDP or you've got somewhere where you can really look at all the data that you have, because almost like, yes, sales might say, I think it's these accounts, but without that overlay of insight, you could be making the wrong decision. And this is the first point in the journey, 1 and 2 together, the first point in the journey where marketing and sales become aligned, because you get in a room and sales might say, this is the accounts, marketing say, great, we're going to take those and we're going to get some more information on those accounts, so you really, really have everything that you need to make that decision. And then you get back in the room and together that decision is made.
Yeah, I think, you know, an ICP, an ideal customer profile, is your absolute starting point for what you've discussed. Make sure those accounts. It is interesting how many organizations, that companies that come into the sphere have drifted away from what they've agreed should be the ICP. And I think, yeah, some form of assessment, you know, as you ramp up your investment, you need to ask some hard questions about some of those accounts, that goes beyond what's the size of the opportunity. Right.
Absolutely. Well, it all has to be about long-term value, doesn't it? Like, who are going to stay, like when we've identified those our ICP, that's usually because we know that they will have value for us over the long term. So the last thing we want is someone coming in and saying, yeah, this is a really quick win, let's go after this one because it's a huge opportunity, but you know, they aren't aligned well with the core business proposition. So yeah, you know, I can see how that could happen. So that, I guess, is a major pitfall to avoid, and the way to work that is just to get all that insight together.
Yeah.
And then obviously you're going into planning stage, and we're going to talk a little bit about you know, creative and how you push out more of a thought leadership approach to engage with prospects, activation, and then you know, finally measurement, but really upfront in, you know, phases 1, 2 and 3, you need to be all really, really comfortable with how you're measuring it.
Yeah.
The last thing you want to do is,
And I was going to say, and I think, look, for years, one of the criticisms of account-based marketing was it's just good marketing, right? And I have to say, I think that's been a fair shout. And I think, because, you know, what you've talked through here, it's a marketing cycle, isn't it? And it's no different really to what we grew up on, or learned how to kind of run marketing. So yeah, I think this is you know, a solid foundation.
Yeah, but I think I tend to, and maybe less in the manufacturing space, I don't know, but I tend to find with all of the value that really great digital marketing brings us, sometimes we can lose our like focus on those first 2 sections. We'll just go, we'll just get, you know, we'll just reach out to lots of people and we'll get some data. But it's like there is no, and I think that's what ABM brings beyond perhaps what good marketing might be considered. Okay, well we'll use a data house to give us lookalikes of businesses that fit this criteria. Fine, and you know, just target those. But you need to do all of your own individual research and insight. And I think that has fallen by the wayside in some cases. So I think that's what ABM brings back front and center.
Yeah.
So we have, again, I'm going to go back to another point that you made, which I think is so true, is that if you have in manufacturing, say, key account marketing or key account management, marketing's role in that has traditionally been collateral, product information, data sheets, supporting sales with going in and talking about this is our solution. But I know you're really clear that with ABM that needs to be flipped, and you did that really well with Henkel and the award-winning campaign. So can you talk to us a bit more about that?
Yeah. So we've been working with Henkel for a number of years, and this was one aspect of the program. I think the guys had identified early on that there was a need for more content and a broader range of content, and I think probably quite a lot of the people watching today, certainly a lot of our clients, quite often acknowledge that's one of the gaps that they have. Creating up-to-date, engaging, great content is not always an easy thing to do. But I think what chatting to you before, Kirsty, I think one of the learnings that we've seen in manufacturing is sometimes some of the messaging and content can still have a very heavy product focus. And that there might be some benefits in there, but it really is a feature-led piece. Now, what I'm not saying is that we shouldn't be doing that, right? That's needed. That's why it's there. But what we have learned over the years is that if we want to be more engaging, then we need to change the face of how we start that conversation. So if we talk about persona, if we start to think about the roles that we've been sending this product information to, the different roles within that organization, and you start to look at what they care about, what keeps them awake at night, suddenly you have challenges that you can use and talk about. You have challenges that, we know you face this. We know this is a problem for you. And then you have a link then to then go and talk about your product and your benefits. I think obviously the next step up from that is some of those challenges are industry based. Okay, we see definitely within different sectors, verticals, whatever way you want to call it, there are very specific, broader trends and challenges that everyone's facing in that industry. That again, they're looking for answers to succeed, to survive, whatever it is they're trying to achieve in their role. So if you can start by talking about those and then relate how you can add value to them solving that, you can see how, again, product information is great, but you can see how what you're doing is creating things that are more engaging, hopefully. And I think the other thing today is it's incredibly competitive out there for people's attention. Incredibly competitive now. Interrupting someone's journey to take them off on your journey is quite a hard thing to do. So you really have to push the boat out to do things that you think will engage someone. Now, the last two, outcomes are basically much broader kind of benefits and much more holistic benefits. Now, the beauty of outcomes is when you've got an organization that has a massive portfolio of products, what you're looking for into your large accounts is to find a smaller number of fewer messages to engage those accounts. So if you can address certain outcomes, now an outcome might be collaboration, for example. Now within collaboration, there are lots of different things that you can do. You can see how you can rearrange all sorts of product, solution and sales plays under an umbrella like collaboration, right? It gives you that license. So if you focus on certain outcomes, as part of your messaging content strategy, it gives you much more flexibility to use what you've got to make it all work together when you're going into these large accounts, and you can't always be product or solution specific. And then the very last one, again, with large companies, and we do see that. I think the account teams do this, but sometimes marketing haven't got involved in perhaps thinking through and helping with the messaging. Partnership. When we were talking earlier about moving from a transactional to a strategic relationship, the transactional relationship is all about buying the product and the solution. The strategic relationship is, where are we going together? What's your innovation roadmap like? What's your global consistency for your product quality, your pricing, your ability to deliver? How responsive are you to us when we really need something? So these are what we would call partnership messages. So I think there are lots of layers that you can start to think about and introduce into your messaging and content.
Yeah, and I suppose thinking about the point that we made earlier on engagement, if you made all of that investment in getting the insight, identifying these are really good accounts for us to go after because they fit our ICP, and then you go out with a product related message, maybe the 5% will engage, but you're almost wasting your conversation on the rest, and you aren't any further forward. So it's like, you know, if your objective is see us as trusted advisors, so the themes that you talked about there, the outcome-based themes, get them to switch on to your organization as someone who understands those challenges. Once that engagement has started, then you're there for when they do come into the buying cycle. But I think that's really clear. What you're saying is that, you know, we need to think about topics, thought leadership content that is going to be useful to them regardless of where they are in their journey. Because then you're starting to get front of mind, and you know, you've got a small part of their attention, but you wouldn't get any if you just try to sell. So
look, 100%. And I think even for, so Henkel do adhesives, and it's a very, it's opened my eyes. It's a very, very technical industry. Their adhesives, if you can see here, their adhesives get used on the circuit boards across manufacture of electronic components, particularly say in data centers. And data centers, as they get more sophisticated and kit shrinks, heat is a massive problem in data centers. And so Henkel are completely obsessive about thermal management through their adhesives, right? Because it all plays a part. So it's very, very, it can be very, very, the thermodynamics of adhesives can get very technical. However, what they are doing at the moment is they've been creating some more recent content that actually looks at people and the people involved in the process and what they are doing and where they see things going. They're injecting a very human aspect to their content. And again, when you're trying to engage people, human stories ultimately are more interesting to people.
Yes, of course.
So there's a range of things I think you know, manufacturers can do and think about here in this space.
So taking it, obviously you're not going to lose your technical authority, but not going, you know, with the first pieces that you push out and the messaging that you put out, you don't have to get into that level of detail, is what you're saying. Yeah. Okay. Right. So people then. So I am, you know, I've decided that I'm going to embark on my ABM campaign and my manufacturing organization. Do I need to recruit a whole new team? Like, where do I start?
So I've cherry picked a few things, Kirsty. I appreciate we could probably talk all day about how do you create the right ABM department. But typically the biggest change for most marketing teams is, you know, what skills and roles do I need and what level of experience do I need to do what I want to do. So I think spending some time really identifying that, you know, understanding who is going to work across the business to build the bridges, who is going to work and create programs, who perhaps has that strategic capability to think through what are the right segments and what do those segments need, and then how do we go and do it. And again, you know, where we've kept back to, have you got someone in the team who really understands the MarTech landscape out there, the capabilities of that MarTech, and how it can really give you an advantage, you know, as your team evolve and develop their programs, right? I think on that, touching on that MarTech stack, because I think it is such an important one, because most clients that we see need to scale, and when you're talking about their team, they need someone in there that can help them. Typically, I'm going to say intelligence, segmentation, personalization, and reporting are perhaps the kind of broader use cases that drive most of our time and thinking. It's a really important area. You know, there's an ever growing number of platforms and applications. And as we were saying earlier, getting this bit right can make a massive difference to your ability to scale what you want to do. And I think for a lot of people, you know, that's where success lies, is right. Can I scale what I've learned, and can I scale it effectively? Look, the third one I brought out is a classic kind of cultural if you're going to change things, and ABM arguably can be quite a big change, you have to have people on board to do it. Marketing cannot do it alone. You touched on the importance of sales and marketing being aligned. In large matrix organizations, that might involve other teams. It might involve product marketing or business units and business unit leads. It might involve pre-sales or pre-sales consulting. It might involve customer success teams. I mean, we've had rooms full of very diverse roles, all contributing to the success of one account. So I think there needs to be a real, the clients that we've seen win are the ones that have spent as much time focusing on how they build bridges and kind of onboard their company to the ABM program as much as anything else. The interesting thing, chatting to you when we spoke about this previously, it's what's really specific about this for manufacturers. We see this real manufacturing challenge. I'm not saying it doesn't exist in other industries, but a lot of manufacturers, they've got a lot of heritage. They've got a lot of heritage, and laced in that is tradition.
Yes. And
pride in that tradition as well. And so when you're trying to make a change in an organization like that, you have an inherent barrier. You have an inherent desire not to move too far away from that heritage and that tradition, because that has served the organization so well for such a long time. It tends to be through and through who people are. So I think in particular that we've seen in manufacturing organizations, I'm sure it's going to be nothing new to the people watching this. I think there's an added element to the change management piece here, to the onboarding of an ABM program.
Yeah, and then how do you go about overcoming the challenges around tradition? Do you need to then if you're thinking about like sales maybe having been done in a traditional way, do you need to identify a champion within the sales team who's like, right, well, I'm up for this and I can influence? How do you make that work?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on it. I think you need two things. I think you need leadership. You need leadership buy-in, okay? Because you have to be able to fall back on leadership in marketing and sales, saying, no, this is something we've agreed to do, and whatever has disrupted or come along, guys, we need to stick to it and keep on trucking, right? So you need that. But I think you're 100% right. The reality is, in an account team and sales environment, there are a vast number of people who know what they're doing, have been very comfortable being successful in the way they've been successful, and are not always immediately up for changing what they do. So to a T, we always tend to look for a champion, someone who warms to the idea, is enthusiastic, genuinely wants to get involved with it. And we tend to pick those people over and above any other consideration, because that's, when you're learning something new, when it's different, it might be a bit painful at the beginning. Certainly from sales point of view, ABM is always too slow. Okay, always too slow. That time to get things done, what they care about is being in market. So I think you're 100% right. The champion makes that so much easier. And then if you can make a case study out of the champion, it's incredible how quickly other teams will go, well, if that's successful, I want to be part of it.
I want to be part of it. So leadership and then a champion across your sales organization then. And then finally, before we wrap up, the most important thing, well, I guess not the most important thing, but probably the thing that's going to be on everyone's minds is like, okay, I'll do all this hard work. How am I going to be able to demonstrate that my program has been a success? And I know you've got some thoughts on how you've created some measurement frameworks for your clients. Can you talk to us a bit about that?
Yeah, so I think there's two things here. If anyone's done a little bit of reading around account-based marketing, or if they've started their journey, they'll probably be quite familiar with the 3 R's. this idea of reputation, relationship, and revenue. And I think that served us well as a guiding light to think strategically about how we measure and what we're doing and how we set our strategy. But I think the reality that's hit is that very quickly we've moved to engagement and pipeline. Why have we moved there? Let me start with revenue. It's what we were chatting about earlier. A lot of ABM programs have failed, not because they've actually failed, but because when the business measured them, the revenue had not been recognized into the business.
Yeah.
And that was quite often because of a long sales cycle that went into a different financial period, right?
Yeah.
So, however, depending, not 100% of the time, but a lot of the time, you can see meetings and early opportunities going into the pipeline within that financial period. So it's not a sale yet, and there's a long way to go, but you've got proof that your activity, your engagement has actually achieved something. And certainly, certainly from a marketing department and an agency point of view, pipeline is a much more immediate measure that gives us a bit of relief. And then for me, engagement is an umbrella idea. We talked about it earlier. You need to build relationships. It can't all be about a sale if you've got a strategic customer that you want to build relationships and have lifetime customer value. So success within ABM programs for me can be a number of things. It can be engagement with the program. It can be engagement with the content. It can be conversations that don't necessarily turn into meetings. It can be all of those things, because if we are capturing and storing those things, actually we've still got those people in our sphere. And then when they are in a buying motion or a curious motion, they know who you are, you know who they are. And there's a much simpler journey then to starting that conversation. And of course, there are some that are going to come through who are in the right space at the right time. And look, the second bit of this is what can I say? I don't think there's a definitive answer just yet. Okay, but there are two camps. Marketing attribution. I don't think there are many marketers that won't have discussed that or thought about that, possibly in the last 12 months or so. That's definitely seems to be a topic that's high up, and definitely a lot of the MarTech platforms from different spheres have all developed attribution elements to their technology, so the ability to link touches and attribute that back. And definitely there is a significant portion of the ABM and marketing community, and not just for ABM, by the way. This applies to kind of other things, demand generation. This idea of attribution is very strong at the moment, and obviously it's a very physical way of saying these touches led to that result, and we believe that has delivered that portion of revenue that you can see in the pot. Therefore, that's us demonstrating our return on investment. There is another approach that we see with, now obviously marketing attribution requires a bit of science and technology for you to achieve that, right? And that's where the interesting bit is at the moment out there. The second approach that we've seen and works equally successfully is that where sales and marketing have formed a true partnership, and sales invite marketing into their QBR, where they're presenting the results for account X, and as they talk through the revenue they've earned for account X, they also present and discuss, and sometimes invite marketing present what were the marketing activities that went across the account. So I'm not going to be an advocate of one or the other. I'm just going to represent that I see there's these two things strongly out there.
Yeah, makes sense. So I think if I could take away like the key points for today, it would be: one, get your data somewhere so you can really interrogate it and work out who the right accounts are for you to go after. Get the right team in place across marketing, sales, leadership, Get yourself a champion. Think about outcome-based messaging and focusing on the challenges of your ICP to engage them, because it's going to be much more difficult to measure direct revenue in, you know, those longer sales cycles. Focus on engagement, not revenue. And then ultimately, you know, when you measure success, you're going to have to look at your own way of doing things, but there's two really great ways to do it. I mean, I love the idea of the joint QBR. I think that's a great way to have sales and marketing aligned, going into a meeting with the leadership and saying, we're behind this program and we're doing it together, and we're demonstrating success or failure together. And I think that would work brilliantly in manufacturing, particularly.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time, Barry. Really, really great talking to you. And I know we've got some great actionable insight from today's conversation, so appreciate it.
Look, it was a pleasure, and thank you very much for inviting me.